Now, we know that the largest international financial centers, New York, London, Singapore, Hong Kong, they agglomerate the most amount of assets under management. Their asset managers are superior in terms of the amount of money they can raise. But part of that superiority is based on the quality and competitiveness of their advisors. In Figure 7, we show the difference between the shares that IFCs get in certain types of transactions and the share that non-IFCs or international financial centers get in these M&A transactions. So anytime you see a bar going up, it basically shows that the share of transactions for advisors working out of an IFC is bigger, and anytime you see a bar going down, that shows that the extent of transactions handled by advisors not working in an IFC is greater. And we divide the types of transactions according to the amount of equity that the M&A transactor is looking for in the target. So, for example, looking at this first section in the figure, we show the increase in capitalization from a acquirer to a target, and we show the range in that increase from 0 to 10%, increase of 11% to 50%, and increases of 50% or more. And what we see is that for those relatively large increases in capitalization, IFC-based advisors worked more often on those types of transactions, whereas for transactions from 0 to 10% of equity, we see that non-IFC advisors worked more often on those types of transactions. And I won't go through each bar in the figure, but we can see that some bars go up, some bars go down. None of those bars are very big. We only see a difference ranging from roughly 6% to negative 6%. And therefore, we interpret these data as saying that there is no particular division of labor or specialization of advisors working in IFCs as opposed to advisors not working in IFCs. So the bigger message from that figure, and indeed the whole slide, is that we cannot simply say that certain advisors or certain cities focus on particular types of transactions. Looking at the figure, what we label 8A, right next to that figure, we show the percent of transactions engaged by leading advisors. In this case, we show financial advisors, but in the paper you will also see percents of transactions advised by law firms. We do not see a crisp, clear focus on different types of advisory contracts for different types of advisors. It's not the case that most of Morgan Stanley's advisory work focuses on finance or focuses on consumer staples. It's not the case that Citigroup's advisory work focuses mostly on consumer discretionary sector. We see that the proportion of advisory work among these different top advisors varies across the different types of clients that you see shown right below the figure, and therefore we do not see at all any kind of specialization between advisors like classical economic theory might predict. And what is more, we do not see any type of focus based on the type of client. We do not see that Morgan Stanley, for example, focuses mostly on state-owned enterprises, or that Citigroup does, even though in the case of Citigroup we see a relatively large proportion of clients as state-owned enterprises, especially when compared to JP Morgan's 15% of state-owned enterprises. But it's certainly not the case that across the entire spectrum of advisors that we see any kind of specialization. Now, taking a more detailed look at different sectors and the extent to which elite advisors get involved as opposed to non-elite advisors, figure 9, as labeled in the slide in front of you, shows the percent of advisors working in bulge bracket or big law firms. And what we see is that the proportion of these elite advisors might be higher for healthcare than for consumer staples. Of course, we don't conduct any kind of t-tests or other tests to see if these proportions are truly different or not different. But even eyeballing the figure, you can see that it's not the case that these elite firms, when taken as a whole, seem to focus on particular sectors or industries. We see a relatively equal pattern of advisory relationships across sectors. And we see that even more clearly when looking at the ranking of cities as the container, if you will, of these advisors. Now, naturally, if London-based advisors, for example, are just so awesome, and London is really giving these advisors something incredible that allows them to compete better than New York or Singapore, then we would expect their city ranking to remain relatively higher than their peers over time. But we see there's a relatively large amount of variation in the ranking of these cities holding both financial advisors and legal advisors, and therefore there has to be some variable or variables which are buffeting these advisors, much like in the analogy we talked about earlier when we talked about the rapids, pushing advisors downstream and thinking about what are the factors that are causing differences in the competitiveness of these advisors. Now, in the literature, people often say, well, big is bad, big is awesome. Gravity is the factor that causes clients to go to companies. When advisors are very big and popular and powerful, then they will attract clients. But we see that there aren't these gravitational pulls both between clients and advisors and between advisors themselves.